Over the past few weeks, we've seen a ton of movement in fantasy drafts, and certain players are rising up draft boards faster than others. So in this video, we are going to break down and use the last 10 years of experience that I have doing this to identify if those players rising, if it's warranted or not. And we're going to start with the guy who is rising the most, and he still goes late in drafts right now in round 15, but he's up 2 rounds, 22 picks, and that's Demario Douglas, who is the Patriots' #1 receiver, at least from last year and potentially heading into 2024. Now that kind of sounds a little bit weird to say, because if you look at his stats from last season, his rookie season where he was a late round pick, he only caught 49 balls. He only had 561 receiving yards, but yeah, that's how bad this Patriots offense in general was last year, especially the pass catching core. They suffered a bunch of injuries, guys in and out of the lineup, so it was Douglas who stepped up and put up a team high 561 yards. But it was actually better than this seems. Like, this doesn't do justice. 561 yards, okay, that's like a wide receiver 2 on 3 on most teams, but keep in mind, this dude was a rookie. If you look at his final 9 games of the season, he started to pick it up when guys went down, like Kendrick Bourne with injury, like other players, Devontae Parker dealing with injury. You can see right here, 6.9 targets per game compared to just 3.4 for his first 5 games, month and a half of the season. So he started to come on. This 6.9 targets, we can call it 7 targets per game. That's around the mark that you'll see a top 24 receiver have in the NFL. And again, this is nothing to write home about, but it's pretty good considering the fact that he was in the number 31 ranked offense with quarterbacks like Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi throwing him the ball. And it's not like we're talking about a guy here when we're trying to decide if he's worth it or not. We're not talking about like a 4th, a 5th, or a 6th round pick. This guy's still going in the 15th round of drafts. Now he has a pretty good chance to be his team's #1 receiver. And you can see he goes right next to another guy on his team, Jaylen Polk, who I personally like the upside more pedigree coming out of college, 2nd round pick compared to Douglas being a late round pick. But you can't argue with the fact that Douglas last year proved that he can be effective in the NFL, where we still have to see Polk do that. And even if we argued who's the #1 receiver on this team, I feel pretty confident in saying that those 2 guys, Polk and Douglas, are going to start. Because let's just look at the depth chart on Player Profiler right here. You have those 2 guys who I think are the starters. You have Kendrick Bourne, who is now aging, coming off of an ACL injury, a 4th round pick, Javon Baker, who might be an upside, nice deep league option, dynasty player, Juju, who wasn't even starting last year, Jalen Reagor, we don't have to spend much time on, same with Kayshon Boutte, and then KJ Osborne, a nice wide receiver 3 at best for a team if he's put in the right situation, which I'm not sure if this offense will be that compared to Minnesota, where he was for the entire term of his career to this point. Term of his career is a new one, but that's just what the brain spit out right there, but you get what I'm trying to say. Now, there is one area where Douglas might have an instant leg up on Jaylen Polk, and I'm not too certain about this, but we at least saw it last year. This is a true inside-out wide receiver, and they're saying that Jaylen Polk could do that. We mostly saw him on the outside in college last year, a downfield option with nice hands, but last year, 56% of his snaps in Demario Douglas was out of the slot. He also was able to win, though, on the outside. He really showed versatility in both areas, despite being a little bit of a slighter, smaller build. And I'm honestly not as concerned with the quarterback situation we've mentioned in other videos as a lot of people are. Like, Jacoby Brissett doesn't get anybody excited. He's not the sexy quarterback that you want to be your #1 quarterback, but I do think he's underrated. I do think he was able to lead quality offenses in Miami, definitely in Cleveland, and supply wide receivers with big performances like Amari Cooper, like Jalen Waddle at times. And then you get Drake May here, who is just kind of that upside piece that at some point this year we assume is going to start. And if he's as good as his draft capital indicates, well, then you get a lot of maybe ceiling performances and floors for Demario Douglas. So when I'm trying to decide if his rise, the most rise out of any player the past month of the season in drafts, Demario Douglas, if it's warranted or not, I'm leaning yes. Especially when we consider he goes in round 15. I do prefer Jaylen Polk over him, but if Polk is gone, then I do think Demario Douglas is fine in that range. Even if you wanted to argue you'd rather have him, reports are out of camp that Douglas looks like the #1 receiver right now. Now, the next man up is this guy, Jaylen McMillan. He's rising the 2nd most of any player right now. He currently is up 17 spots in drafts, so about a round and a half. And look, you might not know who this guy is. You're just getting back into fantasy football. That is completely okay. I'm going to get you caught up to speed. Because if we pull up the draft picks on ESPN for this past year, you can see right here, Jaylen McMillan out of Washington was a 3rd round pick. Believe it or not, he was taken in the 3rd round. They traded for him. He ends up being a wide receiver out of Washington. He spent a couple of seasons there, a very quality offense, was one of 3 wide receivers drafted by Washington. We talked about Jaylen Polk earlier. They had 3 guys going round 3 or earlier, so you know that offense was great. And despite playing next to all those guys in college, he was still able to put up productive performances. McMillan has solid size to him. He's 6'1", 197 pounds. That's pretty strong. And then you go down to his college career, and it was a little bit hit or miss because of some injuries. You can see last year in 2023, just 9 games, he was banged up. But his big year was 2022. He ends up playing all 13 games. He has about 1,100 yards. He's winning in the slot and downfield, 14 yards per catch. He then moved into the slot as like a permanent role last year in 2023. Jaylen Polk was on the outside. Rome Odunze was on the outside, 2 now rookie wide receivers in the NFL from Washington. And he only averaged 12.4 yards per reception. Still pretty good for a slot receiver. That's kind of the way that Washington college offense played. Even if you were in the slot, you were getting some downfield usage. They love throwing the ball downfield. Kind of a reason why I like all the Seattle receivers this year, because that offensive coordinator or coach is now with Seattle. But besides the point, it kind of just shows you that McMillan does does have this versatility to go on the outside and win and in the slot, but he's probably best suited, honestly, on the outside. I'm just not too sure he's going to see that role in this Bucs offense. Now, coming out of college, he kind of profiled out like an Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like I said, he can go in the slot and out wide. The NFL, maybe he plays in the slot more because he's not the fastest receiver. I mean, 4.47 is a solid time. It's not as bad as Amon-Ra, who is in like the 4.5s, I believe. So it's still a above average time, but he's kind of this guy who, in terms of his long speed on tape, it's not there as much, and he wins more with explosiveness and bursts in the short areas like the slot. So when you're trying to project him to the NFL, when he's facing better athletes overall, that might be where his role is best suited, and maybe that's where he can come along this year, but I do have questions. Because right now he is moving up draft boards, and look, he's going in like round 19. So this is for your deeper leagues, this is for your dynasty leagues, this is for your waiver wires, or just to keep an eye on him as OTAs come, because he might end up winning a starting job here. So he's going around guys like A.T. Perry. I'll take McMillan at this point. Perry not getting great reports out of camp. Odell, a bigger name for sure, but I'll still take McMillan at this point in the range that he's going, but there are questions. And the biggest one is, how the heck does this guy get on the field this year? Because Mike Evans is still there, just signed a 2-year deal. He's going to be on the outside. Chris Godwin is there, and although he's coming off of a somewhat down year where he had bad touchdown luck and was kind of miscasted, they're already talking about the new offensive coordinator, Liam Cohn, putting Godwin in the slot more, where he's seen his most success in the NFL, and where older wide receivers with his size and experience usually find a lot more success as well. So if we know that those two guys, Evans and Godwin, are going to be playing on the outside, and in 3 wide receiver sets, Godwin's going to move into the slot more, now McMillan is trying to fight for a spot in 3 wide receiver sets on the outside, where he might not be as suited in the NFL due to his athleticism. And then you factor in that there's also this guy, Trey Palmer, the 6th round pick last year for the Bucs. You can see right here, 6th round, who was the fastest wide receiver in the NFL, or at the NFL Combine last year, ran a 4.33, and then he actually produced in his rookie year on a team that ended up having those 2 wide receivers we talked about, and Rachaad White ranking number 2 amongst running backs in overall touches, only behind Christian McCaffrey, and K-Dot and a tight end who was involved. You still got this wide receiver 3 as a 6th round rookie earning 4 targets per game. Doesn't sound like a lot, but that's significant. 68 targets is enough to show that the team trusted you. He played in all 17 games. Can McMillan even beat out Trey Palmer becomes the question that we're seeing now in camp. And honestly, it's a long shot for me when I look at the depth chart right now. I think like if you're taking him, yeah, it's the 19th or 20th round. There's really not a lot of other guys down here who have skill and we're taken into a nice offense and maybe have a decent situation, so go for it. But you're really banking on either Mike Evans and Godwin getting injured, which look, they're both aging veterans. Evans now in his 30s, Godwin approaching that. He's had past injuries and serious injuries in the past, so it wouldn't be the most shocking thing. But at that point, then you start to wonder what the overall offense looks like if they lose 1 or 2 of these guys. With Baker Mayfield there, is he really going to be able to get it done with like a Jaylen McMillan and keep the offense afloat? Honestly, at this point in the drafts, when I look at some of the options that are down here, Jalen Hyatt kind of looks a little bit more appealing to me. I think he has an easier path to targets than a McMillan. You can even scroll to a couple of other players who go before him. Tyler Boyd looks appealing, although he's the wide receiver 3 on his team. He'll work out of the slot. The Titans want to throw more this year. These are some of the names. Even Braylon Allen, I mean, he goes like a round earlier. The Jets, what looks like their backup running back. I don't even think I could find him on this ADP. But Braylon Allen is another name, an RB2, who was a really productive player in college at Wisconsin, who's gaining some hype. I'd rather just maybe take a shot on a younger upside running back. If something was to happen to Breece Hall, he can step in. So I do think Demario Douglas rise is worth the hype. And right now, Jaylen McMillan, even though he goes super late, it's kind of like it's hard to have a stance on it. He goes around 19, but I don't really think it's worth the hype. But this next guy, it's about time some people have caught up on him, and Noah Fant, because I was hoping he'd remain a secret all off season, but as of right now in fantasy drafts, he's currently up. If we pull up the ADP right here on Fantasy Pros, Noah Fant goes as 191st overall player. Still going as a late pick, but he's up 13 spots over the past couple of weeks alone, and I only think it's going to continue to rise as week 1 approaches. Because Fant just fits this mold as a tight end in general, especially a late round tight end that has all the keys to break out, even though he's years into his NFL career. First off, you talk about a guy who was a former 1st round pick, so we're talking about pedigree from college. We're talking about probably has production background and just overall athleticism, which if you look at his athleticism on Player Profiler, yeah, it's great. The higher these bars are, closer to 100th percentile, the better, and he's basically there in every single thing. Agility, burst, catch radius, speed 97th percentile. All of this is fantastic. We've known this about him, right? When he got drafted in his time in Denver, then he gets traded in the Russell Wilson trade to Seattle. He just really hasn't had a chance to pop off, in my opinion, but now everything is working in his favor. Because even though he's entering year 6, and yeah, it's already been 6 years now, he's played 5 full seasons, this is the best opportunity for him. First off, his competition is gone. Colby Parkinson, Will Dissly, these guys who have been on the Seahawks for the past 2, 3, 4 years, they're now gone and basically were not replaced. AJ Bardner, an NFL draft player, was taken. Other than that, his only competition is going to be a guy named Farrell Brown, who you might recognize the name if you've been around in the fantasy streets or just football. He's mostly like a blocking tight end, maybe picks up 10, 15 catches in the season. There's really nobody there for the first time really in his career for Noah Fant, or Fant, however you want to pronounce it, to have competition with. And then you factor in, which I mentioned earlier about Ryan Grubb, the Washington head coach now being in Seattle. That team loved to throw the ball downfield. They love to use 3 wide receiver sets. That has 1 pass catching tight end on the field. This is going to lead to probably more overall passing, more explosive passing, at least in theory. theory and what everything is saying out of camp, DK Metcalf interviews, JSN, Jackson Smith-Njigba interviews, it looks good for all the pass catchers, which includes Noah Fant, who last year, with that other competition there, with not as pass-friendly of an offense, using a lot of two wide receiver sets, not a lot of great pass-catching tight end routes and concepts, he only played 54% of the snaps, 33rd in the NFL. Not great. He only ran 19 routes per game, 24th in the NFL. He's just not out there all that much. I think that alone is going to change this year, which automatically, just being on the field more, you're going to lead to more opportunities for a talented tight end like Fant. And I know the last name Fant versus Fant, I've heard him say it multiple ways. I've heard other people say it multiple ways in terms of in the media. So if you believe it's Fant, that's fine. If you believe it's Fant, that's fine. Whichever one comes out of my mouth, we know we're talking about the same player here. Now, one concern people might have is that, yeah, there are three great wide receivers on this team. DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, some great veterans. Then JSN, a second-year player who's going to operate out of the slot, mostly a player who comes out with first-round pedigree. I get it that these guys might give you concerns on what can we really see for an overall target share out of Noah Fant, but those guys are going to be winning in different ways. Those guys, we're not comparing Noah Fant to DK Metcalf in the third round, a Tyler Lockett in like round 8 or 9, JSN in like round 8 or 9. We're comparing him to his competition at the tight end position. Can he beat out the guys who go next to him, above him, like Isaiah Likely, a backup tight end, like Chiga Konko, who has 3 wide receivers as well that he'll be competing with, potentially with a worse quarterback situation in Will Levis, right? These are the types of guys who go around him, like Jonnu Smith, who has to compete with loads of talented players in Miami. I just rather have, in my opinion, definitely Noah Fant. So he is somebody out of the 3 names we've talked about. He's rising. It is completely warranted. He's an absolute somewhat sleeper, but now that he's rising, not as much so, but a great late round tight end in my opinion. Now, before we get to this next receiver who's up 10 spots right now in drafts, we talked about him actually a month to a month and a half ago, and you could have got a better value then, but you can still get value on him right now. Before we bring him up, I just want to let you know about the Fantasy Blueprint. We've talked about it all summer long, but just in case you're just tuning in or need that little urge, if you want to win your fantasy league, if this sounds like you want to beat your friends, take home a championship, you can get access to my risk-free blueprint, which has all the tools and information you need to do just that, and you can get it risk-free right here through one of our partners. There's a link down below. I'll also put a QR code on the page shortly. The Fantasy Blueprint, this is now our 4th year doing it, and over 10,000 people have used and are currently using this blueprint. And now I mentioned it's risk-free because when you sign up with one of our partners, it's just a one-time payment of $10 for the entire year, not monthly, not weekly, just the entire year, all the way up until your fantasy playoffs. You get tools every single week that will be updated and sent over to you to help you win that week. And if you don't make your fantasy playoffs, you get that one-time payment of $10 right back. No questions asked. This is risk-free. So to get access to your Fantasy Blueprint today, because I know you have fantasy drafts coming up and I know you want to schmack around your friends, right? You can join the 10,000 others who currently have and are using it with the link down below or the QR code right over here somewhere on the screen right now. All right, that wide receiver I was talking about is Demarcus Robinson. We talked about him in a video way back. It was like maybe a month and a half, 2 months ago, or around that time, and it was like wide receivers who deserve more attention. I think that was the title, and Demarcus Robinson was one of them. And at that point, he was going like 2 rounds later. Since then, over the past month alone, he's already up 10 more spots. And yes, this is the Demarcus Robinson from the Chiefs, but it's not that same player. He was on the Rams last year, and he was actually pretty dang productive if you paid attention down the stretch, and you can still get him as the 193rd overall player. He's still not going anywhere near where I believe he should be going, like a round or 2 earlier than this. And when I say he's not the same player on the Chiefs, literally he is the same guy. This is the same guy, right? But he's not the same role. It's not the same red zone only role. 4th option behind Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, and whoever else. Sammy Watkins is on the team at that point for the Chiefs, right? Different role, different team. Specifically, let's look at the end of the year last year, his final 5 games of the season, when Robinson averaged 15.4 fantasy points per game and 7 targets per game. He was a top 15 fantasy receiver during that time. And this was on a team that had Puka Nacua setting rookie records last year, now going in the first round of fantasy drafts. Cooper Kupp, who's always earned targets, whether he's hurt like last year or years before that. We know the pedigree of this upside, and it's not like these guys were out. These guys were not injured. They were playing in those games, the majority or to all of their normal snap share, and Robinson was still producing. In fact, in those games, Cooper Kupp was averaging 8.5 targets, and Puka Nacua was averaging 8.8 targets per game, which means it's even more impressive that Robinson was able to carve out his own role of earning like 7 targets per game as well. And look, Sean McVay just used Demarcus Robinson as his downfield option. He was averaging 14.3 yards per catch, top 30 in the NFL. He kind of took this role away from Tutu Atwell, who was hurt earlier in the season. He was top 20 in yards per target. He was working downfield. He was winning downfield, winning at the catch point. Matt Stafford trusted him deep on these outside go routes, and that's where he was being used. Kupp was in the slot. You had Robinson on the outside with Puka Nacua, and it was working. He was seeing the worst cornerback of the 3 and getting the least attention and making people pay. So again, this is a guy who's on the rise, and he goes in the later rounds. But when I'm seeing who he's going around right now, guys like Marvin Mims. Okay, I'm not all that excited about Marvin Mims. Roman Wilson might be the wide receiver 2 on the Steelers, but Calvin Austin's getting some hype in camp. A receiver from the Steelers might not really be somebody that I'm looking for. Even other names are going ahead of him, like a Ricky Pearsall. Great first-round pick by the 49ers, but not somebody who I see really getting a role in year 1 with all those other weapons in San Francisco. I do think at like one of your last picks in the draft, you can start to target guys like a Demarcus Robinson. Now, this next guy is also up a similar amount of of spots, 10 to 11 spots, and he's a veteran like Demarcus Robinson, but he's going way earlier in drafts and he's rising. And that man's name is Brandin Cooks, who right now is up about a round in fantasy drafts the last couple of weeks or so. He's having a nice camp. There's some reports. People are just realizing that he's still a talented player despite being 30 to 31 years old shortly. He's currently going as the wide receiver 59 in drafts. We can pull it up right here. He goes in round 13 right now, which is a fair price. 136th overall player, going after guys like Jerry Jeudy, who's now on a new team and has had struggles in the past. Mike Williams, who's now an older player on a new team coming off of a torn ACL. I'd just rather have a guy like Brandin Cooks who's not dealing with that kind of adversity and even injuries, and we already have seen him in this Dallas offense for a year. I get it that he's not the sexy pick, but he does make a lot of sense in drafts, and let's explain why. Look, I get the concerns. He's 30.8 years old. He just came off of a season where he was 30 years old. He's now turning 31, but this was a guy who was productive last year when he actually was able to get out there and healthy. He was number 17 in the EPA. This is efficiency, 17, depending on the stats you want to look at. Pretty dang good for a 30-year-old receiver. In an offense like the Cowboys that led the NFL in passing plays per game, and nothing they did this offseason makes you think that they're not going to continue to throw the ball. All they did was bolster the offensive line, bring in no running backs that are going to threaten, right? Tony Pollard gone, Zeke in, that they're going to just run the ball a ton all of a sudden. So I feel good about Brandin Cooks, who was efficient last year. Now, he only earned 5 targets per game, but this is a little bit skewed because he started the season injured, which a lot of people are forgetting. And it was a pretty serious injury. In week 1, he sprains his MCL. This is an injury that has kept guys out for 6 to 8 plus weeks, depending on the severity of the strain. This only kept him out, if you look over here, for 1 game. He only missed 1 game. He barely missed that game as well, only on the injury report for 2 weeks. But you can be damn sure that this injury right here probably lingered the whole first half of the season, and it kind of makes sense when you see when he started to produce, because there was a clear uptick in his production the second half of the season. Over his final 12 games, Cook was averaging 13 points per game compared to just 4 points per game the first 4 games. And 13 points per game would have been good enough to be right around a top 25 receiver last season. And as you can see here, look, no additions were made in free agency to any key wide receivers brought in. The only wide receiver in the draft was Ryan Flanery, who was like a late round pick. If anything, a special teams player in year 1. If anything, it'll take a couple injuries for him to maybe earn out like a slot role, maybe an outside role, but he's not threatening the wide receiver 2 usage of Brandin Cooks. If anything, Michael Gallup is now gone, who was not really too much of a threat last year, but now he's gone. It's the Brandin Cooks show to be the number 2 receiver, not see all of the attention either when you have a guy like CeeDee Lamb out there. So it's been reported that Cooks is having a nice offseason. You can see him right here. He's having a nice, or camp, I should say, preseason somewhat, right? The OTAs. He has a quality quarterback. This is a pass-happy offense. I don't really know why there's not a reason to like him other than the fact that you think he might get hurt this year, which we can say for most receivers in this range of the draft. So I'm in on Brandin Cooks, and I just want to point this out before we get into a couple of other guys here. 60% of you still, now it's down about 1% since I've been bringing it up, but 60% of you are still not subscribed to this channel who watch the channel regularly over the past month. My goal is to get that to 50% by September 1st. It's going to be close. If we're going like 1% a week right now, I get it. People forget to do it. I do as well. Just hit the subscribe button while you're watching on TV, whatever it might be. But here's your urge to do so. It really helps the channel a ton. All right, now back to the video. The next man who is rising, and he's up 10 spots as well. He's a wide receiver as well, going in the somewhat later rounds. And this is going to be Josh Palmer, who goes, similar range as what you're getting in Brandin Cooks right here. A little bit before Brandin Cooks, like a round or so before. He's going in around 12 of drafts as the wide receiver 58 currently. Also still going right around the Mike Williams. Also still going, if we scroll up a little bit, later, like a round later, maybe even 2 rounds later than one Jameson Williams, who I just kind of don't get this because we've seen a couple of years now of success from Josh Palmer and we haven't seen any of that for Williams. A lot of reasons as to why, what we talked about in previous videos about Williams, but I'm just a little bit more comfortable, especially at a cheaper price point, with a guy like Josh Palmer. And look, yes, the immediate pushback whenever you talk about a Chargers player right now that's in the passing attack is that they're going to just run the ball a lot this year. Jim Harbaugh, the new head coach, ran the ball 37 times per game last year at Michigan. Okay, that was college. That was a different story. They have a new offensive coordinator in Greg Roman. Him and Harbaugh spent time together with the San Francisco 49ers a while ago where they ran the ball a ton. But they also had a mobile quarterback in Colin Kaepernick. Not a guy who can pass the ball great like Justin Herbert, but I do think they're going to run the ball a lot. Greg Roman always ranks top 10 in rush rate in his NFL career as an offensive coordinator. So all that does make sense, but there's also the fact that even last year, NFL teams that ranked dead last in passing still threw the ball a decent amount. This is just a passing league. The 49ers threw the ball the least times last year at about 500 times, 491. So at the very worst, you're going to throw the ball about 500 times, meaning a pass catcher should be having some sort of success in that range. And the Chargers are ranked for the 20th most points, meaning I don't think they're going to rank dead last in passing attempts, probably be somewhere around here, around like 550 if they're going to be scoring the 20th most points. And simply put, if you're throwing 500 plus times, 550, maybe even 600 times if they surprise some people with a quality quarterback in Justin Herbert, at least one wide receiver or pass catcher is probably going to have a productive year. And a lot of people do think that's going to be the second round pick that they traded up for in Ladd McConkey out of Georgia. Probably wins the most in the NFL in year 1 out of the slot, but can also move to the outside for sure. And look, I agree. This guy is a great player, but he also goes 5 rounds earlier than where Josh Palmer is currently going. It's kind of already baked in as he goes in the 7th or 8th round when Palmer might also be that guy who can be the number one option. Actually has a career in history with Herbert the last 3 years, but he goes 5 rounds later. And if you just look at everything that happened this offseason, if you're just getting back into fantasy, Austin Eckler's gone. Keenan Allen's gone, the two most targeted players the last 3 years for Justin Herbert. Mike Williams, the number 3 option on that. Gerald Everett, the number 4 option on that. So the 4 most targeted options for Justin Herbert are now gone. Who is number 5? Well, that's Josh Palmer, who we just talked about, because now he has a lot of new players coming in, like a Ladd McConkey, like a DJ Shark in free agency. Quentin Johnson, second-year player coming in after being a first-round, kind of a bust in his rookie year last year, the wide receiver. And he's maybe like the number 2 biggest threat to Josh Palmer. It's probably the rookie Ladd McConkey and then Quentin Johnson after that. Veteran and DJ Shark might actually surprise some people this year, but he's getting up there in age. It's a new offense, a new team to kind of learn. They didn't put a lot of stock into him like I would say that they have in Ladd McConkey, in Quentin Johnson with draft capital, and just trust in what they're saying right now in the preseason and coach speak for Josh Palmer. And the nice thing is we've had those 3 to 4 years now of Josh Palmer and Herbert having a connection, and Palmer's actually started games. There's been 11 games when Keenan Allen has missed and Palmer has come in and be productive. In those 11 contests, he's averaged 12.6 points per game, and that was still in games when Austin Eckler's on the field, Gerald Everett's on the field, Mike Williams is on the field. Now those guys are also all gone, so there might even be more trust or at least leaning on Josh Palmer earlier in the year from Herbert. Long story short, I think he's just going to have the most chemistry right away, even though we're getting some of that built with Ladd McConkey and Herbert right now in camp. I think Palmer's still going to start. If they're going to throw 550 times, even if he's the wide receiver 2 on this team in round 12 with that good of a quarterback and solid coaching staff, I think it's valuable. So I think Palmer's rise is warranted. Now the next guy who's up 14 spots, believe it or not, right now, and I've recently talked about him, is Rashee Rice. He currently goes, if you look at where he's going in drafts, Rashee Rice as a 6th to 7th round pick, as the 75th overall player. He's going right around the range of Deontay Johnson, Kyler Murray, even DeAndre Hopkins are all names I would much rather have over Rashee Rice. And here's the deal. There is a pretty clear reason why he's rising. Early in the offseason, there was a lot of off-field issues, 2 in like 2 weeks, and that kind of had him getting pushed down drafts, looming a possible suspension. But now that's kind of quieted a little bit, and there's still a chance he's suspended 6 to 8 games, and now people are believing it might be 2 to 4, maybe even no games, so he's starting to slowly rise up. But I've already said it in the past. This potential suspension was only an added reason why I didn't like him. There was other underlying reasons that I thought were bigger problems. Now here's the thing. I get why people like Rashee Rice, right? Last year he was the number 1 receiver for Patrick Mahomes, and it was his rookie year, right? He was a 2nd round pick. He paid off. He went out there. He had 102 targets despite having to compete. This was a team that still ran the ball a decent amount with Pacheco, but also having to compete with other guys who were out there drafted before him, and obviously Travis Kelce as well. But as the season went on, it became pretty clear that him earning 6.4 targets per game was just basically because the dude was able to just get on the field and not make a bunch of mistakes like everybody else on this team did, because he had 102 targets. Look at his competition. Justin Watson, just 53. Okay, a guy who for the most part just knows how to run his routes but isn't all that talented relative to other players. MVS, drop problems, pretty one-dimensional. Kadarius Toney, tons of problems. Sky Moore clearly was not ready, at least for the NFL, in my opinion, right away. Even in heading into year 2. McCole Hardman came on later in the season, right? Richie James, more of a special teams player. I thought he was actually talented, should have saw more usage, more of a special teams player. There was really just no competition. As long as Rashee Rice wasn't dropping passes like half of those names I just mentioned, he was getting on the field, but the problem was he wasn't having a dynamic role. Sure, he was piling on targets, but look at this right here. He ranked 99th in average target distance. Average target distance was just 4.8 yards downfield. So really no chance at explosive plays, no chance at these big gains. He had to see 6 to 7 targets per game to even have a solid week, because if he was only seeing 3 or 4, just getting them 5 yards downfield, your targets is not going to be great. Only 5 deep targets on the year, ranked outside the top 100 receivers, despite him playing a ton of snaps, running a lot of routes, and seeing a lot of usage. But now he's going to have some actual competition. A veteran in Marquise Brown, who has 4 straight seasons of 100 plus targets, is a talented receiver, has put on size, can win downfield with speed. Xavier Worthy can win downfield with speed, was productive 3 years in college, a first-round pick that they just traded up for him. I believe he now has a lot more problems that he's going to have to deal with. I think that these guys might be playing on the outside, forcing Rashee Rice into the slot. And the problem with that is he'll see a similar role as to last year, but not as many targets, because those guys I just showed you, Marquise Brown and Xavier Worthy, in my opinion, will be earning more targets than just Justin Watson's 53 from last year, and Marquez Valdez-Scantling's 42. I'm not shocked if you see 100 plus targets like you saw last year for Rashee, go to Marquise Brown, and then you see somewhere around like 75, 80 targets for Xavier Worthy. And who are those going to pull from? Directly going to be pulling from Rashee Rice's 6 targets per game. If he drops to 4 to 5 targets per game, it's a massive issue where he's going right now in drafts. And in my opinion, that's where the death sentence for his fantasy value comes in. It's just in going in round 6 or 7, how can you be paying off if your role doesn't evolve? And now the 2 wide receivers they brought in limit you from evolving. And oh yeah, you're still competing with Isaiah Pacheco's great role and potential checkdowns. Travis Kelce, even though he's 34, a top 3 oldest tight end in the NFL, he's still going to be out there a lot. lot. So honestly, right now when I'm looking at Rashee Rice, I'd rather just be taking shots on his unders in the betting market. When you look at receiving yards right now, maybe you wait, maybe you say, oh, he's only suspended 2 games, and then you start to take the unders, because look, the suspension is just added on top. It's obviously not great if he misses time. That makes it even worse. But even if that wasn't there, I still don't like where he's going in drafts right now. Him rising to me is not warranted. I get why it's happening, but I don't think that it's proper. So now these are the players who have been rising up, skyrocketing up the rankings over the past couple of weeks, and we want to discuss if it's warranted or not. I think we have a little bit of both of those. It's good to be able to identify if these guys who are rising or not are worth it, and it's also important to identify the guys going overlooked, because they could be true league winners for you. And in this video, we discuss right now the 7 most overlooked players in fantasy drafts. Check it out. Check it out right here if you want to be able to get one leg up even more on your friends.